Bam.
This is Mark Harris, and you're watching the Break It Down Show.
Mark has written an incredible book, and it turns out there's a lot of shenanigans that our government does. And when you fall into these wells of shenanigans, you often think, what what is going on here? And Mark, from my own experience, I've seen just a lot of ill-principled behavior where, when I'm on the ground working with someone in a combat zone, I'm doing my best to keep everybody alive, including everybody, And then I find out that, there was no program to do this thing, but the money was spent. Or this is the 5th time in this region we've built a school, and yet none of them are actively schools. And nobody seems to care. All these things, all these lies are laid on top of lies. And I've not found a limit to where, like, oh, no, this part of the government, they're good, they're solid. It seems to be pervasive. And so I wanted to get your take on that. Is this something that is just a byproduct of having a big government with a lot of money from a wealthy nation?
That's a good question. And that's a question that I've been asking myself. I just recently got a response from a FOIA request I made in June of last year. I didn't get an answer till March, and I made the 15 very specific requests. At least 10 or 12, the responses were just absolute blatant lies. And 4 of them were so comical that to believe them, you would have to believe in time travel. That's how ludicrous they were. But, but this has been going on in my life, in my story, my case, since 2008. And the number of agencies at the local, state, and federal level who have committed outright crimes, falsifying records, falsifying reports, obstructing justice, tampering with witnesses, and so forth. And it's, I don't want to make this political. I mean, we all have our political views, and I, kind of grew up a right-wing Christian fundamentalist type, conservative. Don't really identify with that movement anymore based on my own experiences in this story. However, the administration that sold me out the most was the Obama administration. And, carrying over crap from previous administrations. It started out with me being conned and manipulated and set up with a crooked lawyer by George W. Bush's former attorney. And a couple of years later here, I'm ganged up on by all the president's men and women, from a supposed left-wing liberal president. And so it's across the board.
It sure is. Yeah. Hey, look at this. We got Brook Urick joining us. Brook's always great to have around. Brook, what are your thoughts on what Mark has opened with and the things that I've kind of alluded to? Where do you want to take this?
Well, I think Mark and I have some similarities in our stories. We are both Trine Day authors, so our publisher believes in both of our stories. But what I found really interesting about your story, Mark, is just the document falsification. Just again and again, they are, using these systems to lie about you and to perpetuate like false documentation. So I'm just curious, do you think that the digitization of documents is a boon at all to people these days? Because I think part of why it was so easy to falsify all those documents was that they weren't digitized. So you say it's a piece of paper, here it is. And I think that's maybe part of why it was so, I guess, easy to do that to you.
I guess that could be part of it, but again, now here we are in 2025. I have this guy, let's see, Dr. Melcher J. Antoinano, the director of Civil Aerospace Medical Institute for the FAA, lying in writing, just blatantly lying in writing, putting his medical license, his career on the line. Now, if my research is right, and I've had to play lawyer too many times in like 20 cases, representing myself or my kids, if you make a false statement of a material fact in a FOIA response, it's a felony. So there's at least 9 or 10 felonies in this one report. But I mean, in the end, there've been dozens and dozens of felonies
Right.
Giving a federal convict an alibi and lying. I mean, just lying through their teeth, and I could prove they were lying. But I can prove, a dozen or so agencies have lied, and I've got a book here of letters and responses to complaints by real big shots. Roy Austin and Calvin A. Shivers, big shots from the Justice Department, spinning, lying, stonewalling. I was ganged up in court by Sally Quillian Yates, the acting assistant attorney general. Stuart Dellery. Sally Quillian Yates went on to become the acting attorney general. Stuart Dellery went on to become chief White House counsel for Biden, and 4 other muckety-muck big shot attorneys. While I was ganged up on in a related civilian case with 6 law firms, I'm representing myself in both cases. They simultaneously target me with the IRS threatening to seize my assets. I have, this nutcase in my own hometown who's tied to the local sheriff's department, threatening to burn my house down if I don't drop the case. And, granted unemployment, then pulled, offered representation by the Georgia Legal Services, then that was pulled. Went to a hearing to appeal my unemployment, denied an opportunity to produce any records or witnesses, and having the vice president of my airline, who's now vice president of operations at Delta Airlines, sit there and lie under oath and slander me. And ended up in poverty, homeless. If it wasn't for my parents, living in a tiny little 2-room house, raising 2 kids who suffered severe disabilities inflicted by the man that they were protecting in all this shenanigans. Living off of food stamps and food banks and odd jobs and mowing lawns, and I got a aeronautical engineering technology and 10,000 hours of flight time and a stellar flying record and so forth. And that's where I was in 2013. So.
Wow.
Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, if you're just a regular person, which I think we all are, if you're to have that much opposition arrayed against you, what are you supposed to do? I mean, it's crazy. You must have felt helpless.
I did, very. And that was on top of at least 7 plots to frame me in Florida by the same people on criminal charges, while they tried to label me crazy. And I have a history of domestic violence and a history of mental illness and a history of alcohol abuse and a history of alcoholism and all these histories, but nobody can produce where the histories came from because it was all made up. Right. And just pull out of thin air. When
someone says that you're an alcoholic, you have alcohol abuse, I mean, the burden of proof is on them. How does that stick? How does that hold? I mean, I've watched you on a couple other podcasts. And
this crackpot in Oklahoma City literally planted a fake DUI in my records. And that was one of the things I requested in this FOIA request was, where did the DUI come from? Which, even if the DUI had been real, would have been completely irrelevant to my medical certification as a pilot, which is what this one case was about, because it was 10 years old, but it wasn't real. Alcohol abuse under FAA regulations is basically 2 DUIs, 1 in the last 2 years. And I had 0, and the one they made up was 10 years old, so it would have been irrelevant anyway. But then they changed it after they got caught. They changed it to alcoholism, and then made up a medical history out of thin air. So
that it's hard to believe, frankly, right? I mean,
it is.
You're here.
I'm not believing it, but
yeah, your publisher has vetted your book, right? They're not going to put something out. These are professional people, and so when you tell me that someone invented a DUI, again, how do you prove a negative? Like, no, I never had a DUI. I mean.
Well, I tried, and that's when they changed it. Oh, it was alcoholism, but the history of alcoholism was an evaluation I received in the military that cleared me of any alcohol abuse disorder and cleared me to fly. That was it. So they said that was week-long outpatient treatment. Well, no, it wasn't. It was a little evaluation that over a silly little incident off base when I was on leave, on vacation. And they sent me to this evaluation. Alcohol intoxication was the diagnosis, cleared to fly. Nothing reportable about it to the FAA or anything else. And these were professional military doctors doing this evaluation. And ironically, all these years later, it was these old dinosaur ex-military doctors who were the ones who sabotaged my career using this old military record. So, anyhow.
Yeah, I think a lot of what happened to you is based on this like hierarchy in these different organizations, like the church, for instance. So I'm just curious, do you like I think you said you kind of are not leaning so evangelical these days, but do you have like any advice or words for people who still very much are involved in these organizations and maybe they don't know about the corruption or the fact that these corrupt individuals lean on these hierarchies and get people to do things based on them?
Well, here's an example. Coastline Calvary Chapel in Gulf Breeze. That's where Ed Fleming, George Bush's former attorney, just showed up out of the blue and ran a con on me. But the leaders there pulled out all the stops to cover for my ex-father-in-law and his network of pedophiles. And the congregation didn't know it. And they still don't know it unless they've read my book or seen one of this podcasts. They literally told me to submit to their spiritual authority and shut up about it. My son's first disclosure that they were exploited in child pornography was to their youth minister, Dale Waltman, who now has his own church in Gulf Breeze. And they did not report it, which is a felony to not report that. But they went beyond not reporting it and tried to bully me to be quiet about it. And ended up banning us from the church entirely because I would not go along with their scheme to shut up about this network of human traffickers, basically is what it was. So. And now, I've learned, recently they have their own Christian school. Imagine a church with a Christian school that would bully a parent and children to shut up about their abuse. So my advice would be stay away, stay far away. So,
Right.
Your kids are probably more safe with a transgender reading hour than they are in an evangelical church. So.
That's an interesting way of putting it, but I mean, you're probably right.
Yeah.
But
all this seems so improbable. What's the first step that gets you into this mess where you draw so much attention and so many resources? Like, what's the genesis moment?
Filing a restraining order to protect my kids from sexual abuse. All hell broke loose after that. My ex-father-in-law ended up, assisted by state and local officials, kidnapped my kids in an explicit extortion kidnapping scheme, which I have phone records, audio recorded phone calls, witness statements. It was a kidnapping and extortion scheme involving the leaders of his church, the Destin Church of Christ, a den of thieves in Destin, Florida. The church pastor who threatened me and threatened to destroy my reputation if I didn't shut up and drop all this, he was the sheriff's department's chaplain. The chief deputy who went on to become the sheriff was a proud peacock who would strut around in front of congregations with his gun and his badge on, preaching in uniform about the law of God. And and that was a theme throughout this. The local ATF resident in charge was working on his master's degree in theology. And here we had this guy tied to this network of religious leaders involved in every imaginable scheme of racketeering, fraud, using, drug trafficking, weapons trafficking, international arms trafficking, ties to the mob, ties to, Blackwater and the CIA, politicians, bribing cops. This hornet's nest, this tangled, tentacles of an octopus, so to speak. And Anyway, so yeah, it was filed a restraining order. So he kidnapped the kids. When I filed the restraining order, he surrendered an arsenal of weapons and ammo to the local sheriff's department. He's a felon. They ended up giving him back. I've got records showing that the judge in the case, my attorney, the opposing counsel, the sheriff's department, the local FBI office, the Florida Department of Children and Families, the Niceville, Florida Police Department, all knew they were conspiring to arm a felon and all lied and tried to hide it from me and all, retaliated against me to try to cover their. In fact, they tried to frame me for false reporting of that. They ended up arresting him after I raised hell with the governor's office, but then they conspired to fix the case right away. Steve Herm was right in the middle of that scheme, obstructing justice. He should be disbarred and, if not prosecuted. And that's the son-in-law of Governor Bob Graham, whose wife was assistant secretary of education for Joe Biden. So, but my ex-father-in-law was set up in business by these Church of Christ leaders. This lawyer, I call him the accountant, who had all these ties down in Hialeah, Florida, to politicians, the mobsters, to the White House. He had one business partner who was an advisor to Bill Clinton, another business partner who was advisor to Obama. That same guy had used to be a partner with Donald Trump in one of his businesses. So we're talking mega connections here. And in the middle of all this, there's foster kids who were poof, gone, erased. State says they never existed before. Multiple related cases. And lest I forget, I don't want to miss this part. After all these efforts to frame me in Florida failed, they kept throwing their little grenades at me and missing. They ended up going after my career. I don't know if I'll have to go into all these details, but here's who colluded with my ex-father-in-law, along with the man who's now the vice president of Delta Airlines, and this dirty cop in Florida whose father was a hitman for the mob and tied to Santo Trafficante Jr. James Brimberry, who was the HR manager, conspired with my ex-father-in-law to target my career. I just learned the last couple of months, this is not in the book. So if you read the book, please keep in mind, this is not in the book. James Brimberry has been charged with child molestation, producing child pornography, aggravated sodomy, children less than 10, rape, type of force using a firearm, child molestation and aggravated child molestation, enticing a child for indecent purposes, sodomy, 2 counts, cruelty to children, contributing to the delinquency of a minor. There were 4 victims identified. They were all foster kids. And, I've got more than ample evidence that my ex-father-in-law, Michael Stephen Noble, is a federal convict, a white supremacist who spent the 80s running around Alabama plotting against America, committed all the same very crimes, including the use of a firearm, including producing child pornography. Let me share a few quotes from you here from some of the professionals. The boys are terrified of the grandfather, post-traumatic stress disorder, both displayed significant post-traumatic stress disorder. Because of the reports of sexual contact, sexual abuse, one of the boys described he was made to bleed. The other boy witnessed that. Yes, anal penetration, sir. Very specific about that. He was also very specific that the grandmother got him a tissue to stop the bleeding. Now, I've got a book probably 4 inches thick of stuff like this from an army of medical and mental health professionals. Another report here where my son disclosed to the therapist that he was forced to take pictures of his brother and other children in sexual performances and shown pictures of his mother, who suffers severe mental health problems, pictures of his mother being molested as a child to make him think it was okay. So that's this sicko. And another sicko just like him, James Brimberry, who was promoted to Delta Airlines Equal Opportunity Manager, rewarded. That's another pattern in the story. Everybody got paid off. There was a political payoff for everybody. And this is a long sordid story involving a lot of people and agencies, but everybody who played an important role got a political payoff or a financial payoff.
That is very disturbing. And
Yeah.
I find this pattern with people in power and pedophilia. So I'm curious your take, Mark. Do you think that power breeds pedophilia, or that people in power or pedophiles seek out powerful positions in order to obfuscate justice?
That's a very good question. I haven't thought of it in that context. I think we have a lot of people in power, liberal, conservative, Republican, Democrat, whatever, who are sociopaths, and I think sociopaths are tend to be more successful in public life because of their manipulative skills and rise to power, and so I think that's part of the problem, I suppose. But yeah, it's a good question.
It's all just so so crazy that the people who have all of these negative marks against them, criminal records, are able to bring so much attention to you who doesn't have anything really to worry about, right? And yet here you are. How do they array themselves against you? Are they just linked? Well, I mean, I would have an analyst look and see, like, how do these guys know each other? It's like, oh, these guys were fraternity brothers, and then all of a sudden you put it all together. Have you done anything like that?
I have, and this is a subject I've tiptoed around for years, because they use it to label you crazy, but it's just the reality. There's overwhelming evidence to support the reality. The common link, there's several common links. There's people hiding behind religion. And then there's the cult of Freemasonry. This house of horrors where crimes against children and children themselves have been disappearing was built in 1986 by a Knight Templar Freemason leader, military veteran. My ex-father-in-law, while he was actually facing trial in Alabama on federal charges for his anti-government white supremacist activities, obtains a permit to build this house in Niceville, Florida, that's built by this Knight Templar leader. The house is built on property owned by this Charles Walter Ruckle II, a big shot on the executive council of the John Birch Society, a real Looney Tune guy. Okay. So the same year, he's on trial for his anti-government activities. He's building this house. He enters in to business with this group of related Church of Christ leaders with corporate names like alchemy, androgynous, androgyny, androgyny management, androgen, androgynous management, panoply, which is a knight's helmet, pellucid, tabula rasa, augury, that's divining the future, looking at the entrails in Solomon's temple, right? Solomon Builders, Empyrean Development, Irreducible, Lumination Home, Prescience, Primus, Recondite, Southern Star. My ex-father-in-law's brother, who the kids refer to as Papa's evil twin, if you look, he's all over the internet. If you look at his Goodreads book list, they're all witchcraft books, spell books, books about the Kabbalah, a book by Raymond Buckley, who was a fan of Aleister Crowley and the sex magic. He's a Wiccan, a member of the Texas Witches. The house is numbered 1118. The numbering system on the street doesn't even make sense. Numbered 1118 for the year Knights Templar were founded. When my kids came back from this nightmare after being kidnapped in 2008, my son immediately started describing, a drug lab. He called it Papa's Science Lab, but my son's autistic and has a photographic memory. He drew pictures and numbered the steps. Cool this, mix this, heat this, for producing drugs. I'm interested in these guns because I find out about these guns and he's a felon and all these shenanigans. And he says, "Oh, Papa has a gun room." And he starts drawing pictures of it. Gas mask, the drug lab, grenades, explosives. But then he starts drawing pictures of really weird stuff like swords with skulls on the handle, an altar with burning bones, statues of Anubis, god of the dead, pyramids, and then years later, I find out about the brother. I find out about all these corporations. I find out who's built the house. Then I have this parade of 32 and 33 degree Freemasons messing with my life. This guy, this human resources manager, his father-in-law was a big shot in the Shriners and the Freemasons and a police chief from Maine. He forces me to go to an illegal evaluation with his doctor, who he claims is the company doctor. He's not the company doctor. The company didn't have a doctor, but he's a member of the Roswell Masonic Lodge, who ends up lawyering up later with a fellow member of his Roswell Masonic Lodge, a guy named Clifford Hardwick. The woman who planted the fake DUI in my records in Oklahoma City, I found a post on the internet where she claims she saw angels come down from heaven to take her father-in-law to heaven when he died. Those comments came in reference to an obituary from one of her relatives, a lifetime member of the Order of the Eastern Star and the Rainbow Girls. And turns out the father-in-law who she saw angels take to heaven looked up his grave, and there's the two-headed eagle on it. He was another military veteran and 32nd or 33rd degree Freemason. Then the puppet master behind this whole sabotage of my military career was a guy named Dr. Michael Berry. He was the former medical director for the Johnson Space Center, chose the astronauts for the first shuttle mission, but his father chose all the astronauts for the Apollo missions, who all but one or two were Freemasons, and the one or two, their fathers were Freemasons. So I can't avoid it. It's just the reality. If you look at the names of these corporations, the numbering in the house, who built the house, who's messed with my life over the years, and there's been a parade of these characters. Some guy named Charles Rogers a couple of years ago, when I started making waves again, he contacted me, was going to offer me all kind of help and get my story out and everything. Ended up hacking into my Facebook account, which is a federal crime. And so I look him up. Turns out he's a Shriner and a Freemason. These I don't think all Freemasons have little secret dungeons under their house and rape kids, but apparently there are some who do. So
it's just so much. It's so much craziness. When you take this to try
that's one of the tentacles, though. You have all these ties to the mob. The cop who kept trying to frame me and was cleaning up after my ex-father-in-law, Joey Forgione. His father was a hitman for the mob and tied to Santo Trafficante Jr. and Tony Pardo, the Chicago outfit. This Charles Walter Ruckel II, the John Birch Society guy who owned the property the house was built on. His father and grandfather were tied to Al Capone back in the 1920s. And this goes back, I found this interesting document the other day. I mean, this goes back to the Crestview Masonic Lodge and the very foundations of Eglin Air Force Base, which received its funding by, this is a CIA document I found the other day, through Representative Bob Sykes of Crestview, who was a former OSS, engaged in psychological warfare department, and 33 degree Mason, and Knights Templar. So there you have it. The kids who disappeared in the middle of the night in Walton County in a related case, that was tied to a Pentagon official whose son quoted Aleister Crowley in his obituary, and also tied to other Church of Christ leaders, the same network of Church of Christ leaders as my ex-father-in-law. You have this weird Knight Templar, Solomonic witchcraft crap, and crazy people who believe this crap trying to label me crazy for trying to get it out. So
That is a lot of crazy. So I I'm wondering, so I know you said you were raised to be pretty religious. Where do you find your like spirituality or religious ideology now? Like, is there anything left of it, or have you leaned into something
Not
else?
much. Not much. I'm kind of a man without a church or religion right now. I mean, out of we've been very, very heavily involved in several churches, and betrayed by one after another. And there a lot of these people saw me and my kids struggling, saw the trauma to my kids after they returned from this nightmare. I mean, they spent nearly a decade in intensive therapy, medication, heavy drugs prescribed by psychiatrists, fits of rage, involuntary hospitalizations, so suicidal thoughts and homicidal thoughts. I had to put one of the times my son was admitted to the hospital, I had to watch him turn blue in the face, hyperventilating and going into shock, going to a mental health hospital. And here I have the government saying nothing happened to my son, or my sons, plural. And of course, the same government says this guy, Mike Nobles, was never a foster parent. We have no record he was ever a foster parent. Well, I got pictures of the foster kids in his testimony about being a foster parent. So there's a problem with that. He made this report that set the ball in motion, that sabotaged my career. Well, Tenora Fret of the U.S. Department of Labor says, it wasn't Mike Nobles at all. It was the passenger made the complaint. The sheriff's department hands over an arsenal of guns to him, and they say, call up his lawyer and say, here, prepare an affidavit and say that we returned the guns to somebody else. I mean, that's how ridiculous, on and on, deflect everything away from this one man. And it ended up dirtying hands all the way to White House officials. And what reeks the most about it is the press won't cover any aspect of this. I mean, just the very fact alone that the sheriff's department handed over an arsenal of weapons to a felon and then lied to cover it up, that's a good story, but nobody would report that. This ended up with my kids testifying in court to witnessing their grandfather murder a man in his house and take the body and hang it from a tree and burn it with a quote unquote man dressed up like a police officer present, because he was a police officer. And the press wouldn't report that story. I gave the videotape testimony to WEAR TV in Pensacola, and they would not air it. Nope. This guy, this former Delta Airlines big shot, there was a little blurb in the Jasper or Monticello, Georgia newspaper. It's a police blotter, but other than that, nobody will report that story. That this creep has been raping foster kids, and he was a big shot at Delta Airlines. You'd think an investigative reporter would jump all over that. I've emailed the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. They won't touch it. They won't even respond to it. So.
It is a lot. It's just it's crazy. Is there an end in sight? Is anyone listening to you?
I don't know. I expected retaliation. I still expect it. But nothing dramatic has happened recently. I've had a lot of strange encounters over the years. Total strangers approaching me and threatening me, and so forth. But I thought getting the book done, getting the book out would be, therapeutic for me. And it has been to a degree. I guess I'm disappointed so far that there hasn't been, outrage and, press coverage and, the things you would hope from a story like this. But I'll just keep plodding away and trying to get it out there.
It does. It is. Take me how I'm saying this here. It's hard to believe. It's hard to know where to start. Like, it's such a big mess. But
I still have trouble digesting the reality of it.
Okay, good. I'm not the only one.
Facts. Then I have to look at the facts, and they're the facts.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, because you obviously have these photos, you have this testimony, you have these FOIA requests that have come back, all this information.
Well, I've got police report. I have the whole Department of Children and Families case files. I've got depositions. I've just got a massive amount of documentation, somewhere between 1,000, 2,000 pages. And much of that documentation incriminates public officials, including federal officials, in blatant, outright crimes.
Right.
So I was issued, in the end of this bizarre charade with my medical certification as a pilot, which I'm still grounded and will never be able to fly again as a result, apparently. I was issued a fake medical certificate, fake because I never applied for it, never had an exam for it, never filled out an application for it, that limited me to being a co-pilot, a second-class citizen, a second-class medical certificate. And interestingly, it may be a coincidence, I don't know, it was issued on October 13th, the anniversary of the order to round up the Knights Templar. While this was going on, I was arrested, locked in a holding cell for 6 days on March 18th, the anniversary of the execution of Jack de Malay. My kids were kidnapped on Halloween, but again, maybe those are coincidences, but it's awful strange.
Yeah. Brooke, what do you think about all this?
So many things. So I wonder, so do you think that some of these like religious organizations are really occult practitioners and they kind of like hide behind that like Christian or whatever ideology?
Yes, I do completely. I believe that there are people, who believe in this harmony and balance and dark and light, and will pay homage to Lucifer and God, and they're hiding behind religion, and they really believe this stuff. They really believe, this, and all these androgyny. That comes from the book of Genesis. The Kabbalah. God created them both male and female, so they think it was God was an androgynous God, and that's where Baphomet came from. The androgen that they named their corporations after was Baphomet. And you should see the creepy pictures my son drew. I mean, one, he drew all these symbols. One I just decoded just a few weeks ago with the help of, I don't know if you know Adam Finnegan with Trying Day. It turns out, and I've been trying for 15 years to try to figure out what this symbol was. It was a lesser key of Solomon, and it's a symbol for Baal. And my son drew this when he was 7 years old. And 15 years later, I'm finally figuring out what it is. So, anyhow.
Yeah. Man, it's just, reading through the book too, it's equally as like it's a mountain. And I just feel like I keep walking through the mountain of things that you've put together. And it's hard to wrap your head around this whole thing. If these are federal people, how do you go about maybe getting into like Florida's attorney general or someone, above the county level to try to deal with this?
Well, I was lied to by Rick Scott. I was lied to. In fact, Rick Scott was part of the same network of, at least, friendly with some of the same network my ex-father-in-law was tied to. I have a letter in here from a chief inspector of the Florida Department of Law Enforcement. Here's the game they played. There were at least 18 reports of sexual abuse, child endangerment, kidnapping, made by an army of mandatory reporters, their medical doctor, a psychiatrist, their school principal, a psychologist, their therapist, a law enforcement officer. And they played this game that all these reports were made by me. I'm just the crazy guy making false allegations. They kept trying to frame me for false reporting and label me crazy. But I've got, sworn testimony and written statements by some of these people who actually made the reports, and it wasn't me. I did make a few, and I needed to. I was obligated to. But the majority of the reports were not made by me. And not a single bit of an investigation by any law enforcement agency. They arrogantly, defiantly refuse, saying they'd already been thoroughly investigated by the appropriate agency, the Florida Department of Children and Families, the very organization that put foster kids in this man's home and then erased their records. The epicenter of this was the Emerald Coast Child Advocacy Center in Niceville, Florida. I mean, the people there committed the most obscene crimes. They were feeding him information as the perpetrator, as the one under investigation. they invited him into the Child Advocacy Center and provided him with details of his victims' interviews. And I tried to go talk to the therapist about the interviews with my kids. When I found out about that, I was ejected from the building. So they were still feeding him information when he was in South America in hiding. That's where he was when he emailed Delta customer service, targeted my job. He was hiding in South America, which, I had emailed the Niceville Police Department, said I wanted to come in and make a statement because my kids had said they witnessed their grandfather commit murder. Well, they stalled, said, come in next week. Well, in between, Mike Nobles was on a flight with half his family to South America. So, where he jet setted back and forth, and in the middle of jet setting back and forth to South America, twice he was given a public defender. Now, I don't know how he qualified for a public defender when he had money to move his entire family to South America, build a house down there, and stop in Barbados along the way to pick up offshore money, or how he got visas that quick for all of his family. Not to mention the fact he announced he was moving to South America while he was facing trial for firearms violations, because he knew that he was untouchable and they were going to drop the charges, and they did. After the prosecutor in the case allowed him to threaten to murder me and my kids, violated his probation or his bond by announcing he's moving to another country, and she offered him pretrial intervention for major state firearms violations, which was, she broke the law. He wasn't eligible for pretrial intervention. On about 4 separate grounds, he wasn't eligible, and he turned it down. He turned down a slap on the wrist with no record because he knew it would be fixed. That was LaShawn Riggins. She got a political payoff. She was another former JAG officer. Seems like everybody, and I'm not trashing the military, I'm ex-military. Seems like everybody in this story was tied to the military, though. The doctors, the cops, and LaShawn Riggins is now a judge in Tallahassee, and she threw this case. She suppressed evidence, witnesses, allowed him to threaten witnesses, broke the law, offered him pre-trial intervention. So there you go. One of my favorite scoundrels in this, I don't want to go without mentioning his name, Steve Herm. No, I mentioned his name, Steve Herm. Steve Herm should be disbarred and he should be in prison. He's the one who solicited a false affidavit to say that the guns that the sheriff's department returned to my ex-father-in-law were returned to somebody else. That's a felony. That's obstructing justice. But he blocked me from making reports. I kept trying to get appointments with the sheriff or chief deputy, and all I would get was a letter from lying lawyers, and just spinning and denying, and I've got a pile of letters from lying lawyers. So,
yeah, boy, yeah, it's again, I keep saying it. It's just hard to fathom. It's so deep and so pervasive. It's no wonder you're aggravated and wrote a whole dang book about it. Brooke, do you have anything to add to that, Laura?
I have a question about the weapons. So I'm wondering, what is the connection with the weapons and the pedophile ring? Is it just organized crime, or are they to?
Well, given what he tried to groom and indoctrinate my oldest son, based on his history, he was part of a bunch of people who were getting ready for the South to rise again. That's what he sold to my son. They had bars of gold. He said was going to be used as currency in the future. This Patriot network he was involved in Alabama was tied to the Ku Klux Klan, Posse Comitatus, groups like the Order, and all these hate groups that some who were involved in violent, acts of terrorism. He was in the thick of all that, and in 86 and 87, when they rounded up a bunch of these people like Gordon Call and some of these other, the Posse Comitatus, him and his co-conspirators were arrested. He made a deal with the government. He wore a wire setting up one of his co-conspirators and ended up avoiding prison time, but he still has a federal conviction, even though I recently ran a background check on him and nothing shows up. Now, you can't legitimately hide a federal conviction. without a presidential pardon, but they managed to do it. His whole history of life of crime has been wiped clean. No record of any child abuse, no record he's a foster parent. The guns weren't his, or they were his wife's guns, or they were his son's guns, or there's a gray area in the law that allowed him to have guns. I mean, I've heard every spin and story possible, but he told my son that the guns were there to shoot it out with the bad guys, and the bad guys were the police.
Mm.
And this network he was involved in Alabama, look up Trinity Free Presbyterian Church sometime. Timothy Yarbrough, one of the founders of that church, that was one of his co-conspirators. That's who he set up in 1986. They invite people like John Weaver of the Council of Conservative Citizens and League of the South, a vile white supremacist, rabid racist, preparing for civil war. That's the type of people that come to their church and speak. They have pictures of Robert E. Lee on the church office wall. They're apologists for the Confederacy and slavery. Just like this guy, this Knight Templar leader, Congressman. I'm forgetting his name, but anyway, Bob Sykes. His name was Robert Lee Sykes. He was named after Robert E. Lee, and his father was a Confederate soldier. He was the 33-degree Knight Templar leader, the Crestview Masonic Lodge, who was responsible for getting the funding for Eglin Air Force Base. And again, there's military fingerprints everywhere with all the cops involved. The case advocate for child abuse cases, Tom Dunn, who made all these reports of abuse go away, was a former military policeman. Robert Norris at the Okaloosa County Sheriff's Department made cases go away, former OSI agent. I ended up with a former OSI agent living in my house under false pretenses. And looking back, he was just there keeping tabs on me. This guy at the Calvary Chapel, a former 82nd Airborne, a Vietnam veteran, who manipulated me, another, ultra right winger evangelical type. The monitor, my peer monitor in this program they put me in at work was another, bunker mentality guy that's, got cameras all around his house and guns and everything. He lives in a remote area of North Carolina. Another evangelical from a military family. So there's a pattern here of these paranoid types, extreme right types, and I believe these Southern Freemasons fall into that category. And I'm not talking about, the Grand Lodge of England. I'm talking about Albert Pike, Eliphas Levi Freemasons, whose history overlaps that of the Ku Klux Klan.
Yeah, I'm looking at Tim Yarbrough here online for anybody who's looking. He's posted his sermons. He is a self-described Christian Reconstructionist. He'd like to go back to the look, this, if you were talking about the Islamic,
which goes back to the John Birch Society again too.
Yeah.
All these organizations meet at the John Birch Society.
Right.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, that's fine. I mean, obviously, you're the expert here on this topic, but just for anybody who's like sitting on the fence, like, what is this about? You can go look up Tim Yarbrough's sermons. They're online. Get a Grip, The Secret Life, The Love and Cultivation of Peace, etc., etc., etc. And he is definitely someone who is a fundamentalist, a Calvinist, and wants to go back to old style biblical law. So there you go. I mean, that's someone who's definitely
Pastor Myron Mooney. He was one of the ones who signed the letter supporting the Ten Commandments judge Roy Moore, and slut shamed Roy Moore's victims, blaming them for their own abuse. This pastor of this church. So that's the kind of people. Yeah. And he's a Confederate reenactor with pictures of Robert E. Lee on the wall.
Of course he is.
That's sick. So, all right, I have kind of a terrible question, but I feel like I have to ask it because I'm just so curious. I know that, you were deeply close to a lot of these like pedophilic people. And there's so many systems in place that I feel like are to protect pedophiles. So do you think, or what do you think these people would say as their justification for raping children?
You know, I believe, you know, that people like my ex-father-in-law, you know, and I can't speak about all of them. I think they think women and children are property for them to do whatever they want with, you know, and that's what I think they believe. You know, I think they think there's some kind of little gods, and that women are trash and children are just their toys to be played with. So
It's terrible.
my ex-wife told me one of the creepiest things he ever said to me, looking back, and I was talking about divorce and the impact on my kids and everything. He said the most horrific things can happen to kids as a really young child, and they won't even remember it when they're old. He's lived by that.
No way. Oh my gosh.
It's amazing to me that you can't get, and I'm not saying you haven't tried, because clearly you have an entire catalog of things you've been doing. It's amazing to me that you can't get someone to pay attention to this. I mean, this is just, it's crazy. It's crazy.
Really, my dream is to get, an investigative reporter or reporters interested. I got a plethora of documentation I can share, or someone to do a documentary, for Netflix or even if it's just YouTube, just to get the story to more people, to put pressure on the people. One of the most horrific things about this whole case was they engaged in a formula, and they didn't use the same formula over and over again. Okay. Be the messenger, regardless of who was actually making the report, kill the messenger by smearing me, trying to frame me, throw me in jail, whatever, try to discredit the kids by discrediting me. But law enforcement at the local, state, and federal level hid behind these so-called child protection services, who were shredding documents, falsifying reports left and right, and destroying the foster care records. So you have the agency who provided the victims being used as an alibi by the law enforcement agencies whose obligation it is to investigate the crimes to not investigate the crimes.
Yeah.
And that's it.
Yeah. And anytime you get the government destroying documents, that's always breaking the law.
Yeah.
I mean, it's one thing to have authorization to destroy, but when you don't,
right. And that's one of the things in this FOIA response. Some of the most damning, I wanted copies of correspondence with the Attorney General's office between the FAA, since they ganged up on me in court to block my appeal. Obviously, they had to talk to each other. Well, they say they have no record of that. So either they're lying or they destroyed the records. Right. Either one represents obstruction of justice. So
yeah, they're both breaking the law, right? Whew. What's the next step? Like, what's the simplest step? Obviously, you talked about investigative journalism and documentaries and that kind of thing, but like, what's tomorrow?
Boy, well, tomorrow I'll do another podcast.
Good.
That's my focus for a couple of weeks here. Is I've got a few lined up, and I'm really hoping to get this out to as many people as possible. I still bracing for retaliation. Will it come? I don't know. We'll see. I would like to do a revised copy of the book. Now that I've got this FOIA response, but more importantly, I know about this Brimberry character and what his, I think that someone was pulling strings using leverage that they knew about Brimberry to get him to do dirty work, unless he was just part of the cult and was willing to do it anyway. I don't know, but I don't think it's a coincidence that you've got this guy doing dirty work for Mike Nobles. There's his pastor, Joe Palmer, who faced allegations of raping and torture, beating his wife and kids. No record of any reports there. They used the same formula there. Slut shame and smeared the wife, left her, homeless with a deadbeat ex-husband who wouldn't pay child support, who's still the preacher at the Niceville, Florida Church of Christ. You've got the other case in Walton County, foster kids disappear in the middle of the night. The foster parent, and this is a document I found recently. The foster parent was a French national. He's a French citizen, and his occupation listed here in this document: self-employed investor, and this is a contribution sheet for the National Republican Congressional Committee. He was a donor. Now, this guy was in business with a Church of Christ minister, with a Pentagon official who was apparently a follower of Aleister Crowley, and all the neighbors in this neighborhood said that these kids were being exploited in sexual abuse and child pornography. The whole family disappeared in the middle of the night, leaving computer equipment, cameras, and child pornography behind, and nobody knows what happens to these kids. I don't know if they're still alive. I want somebody to account what happened to those kids. Where are they now? Are they alive? And why were they even there? And the other disturbing thing is, just like the case with my ex-father-in-law, the neighbor said that the home was frequented with friendly visits by local law enforcement. There were cops protecting these people. So
the book, everybody, the link for it is down below, and it's called Houses of the Holy. And if this at all is baffling to you like it is to me, and I've been through this book, and I'm still like, I've got to understand this thing, but it's such a crazy web. Everybody, you get that book. It's down below. You know what I always say? Buy two, buddy, read that. We'll throw it over here to Brooke so she can go next, and then we'll let you wrap it up. And again, Mark, thank you for coming on. It's a fascinating story, and I hope that you're able to get some kind of progress because, let's say you're wrong. Let's at least look into it, and let's confirm that, because you've got all this evidence of all these misdoings and guns and everything else. Let's just take a look-see and see if we find something. So, Brooke,
I'm asking.
Well, it's super commendable, Mark, what you're doing and not giving up. I'm proud to share a publisher with you. And I think Chris saw something in both of us, which is tenacity. We're not giving up on what we believe in and what we know is right. And I think we both want answers to a lot of things. So I will definitely be pitching this to any producers who will listen, because I think there is certainly a documentary there. And it sounds like you have a lot of evidence and documentation that should be investigated by someone, because now I am invested and I would like the answers too.
I love it. Mark, one more time, Mark, go ahead and wrap us up, and then we will do the next thing. Thanks again for coming on the show.
Well, I thank both of you very much. I really appreciate this opportunity. I want people to buy the book. I would make it free if I could. I did not do this for money. I don't anticipate to make any significant amount of money, if any at all. And that's not why I did it. First and foremost, I want justice for my kids. I want justice for the other kids in the other homes. I want accountability of the public officials who lied, committed crimes, betrayed my kids, betrayed these other kids. And I want other people to know the tactics that were used here so they can't be used on them in the future, so they know how to defend themselves. So,
yeah, fair enough. All right, let me wrap this thing up. Hang in there. Everybody else, I'll see you all maybe on Friday, maybe not, but for sure next week we've got a bunch of stuff lined up. All right, take care, everybody.